I started the company in 2014.
Mhm.
So I'd actually graduated the top of my class and I moved to LA. When I get there, I can't find a job. So I'm spending all this time looking for a job. And I'm no joke, I must have applied to 500 jobs and I couldn't even land a single interview. So the crazy thing is I was an international student at the time. And you had to, be in the United States for a reason. So I decided to start the company. And yeah, and I just said I just didn't want this to happen to anybody else. That was my entire mission.
When we talk about people of color, right, we're amongst the biggest consumers of fashion. However, when it comes to equity in terms of profit and ownership, we're arguably not even close to being the top earners. Talk to us about that.
I did a collaboration with JD Sports and Finish Line.
Mhm.
So initially there were 14 brands representing different parts of the United States, right? So we were picked to represent California, which was quite an honor.
Mhm.
And all of those were 14 Black-owned businesses, some remarkably bigger than the Rad Black Kids, way bigger, on every metric. But the interesting part was once I started digging, I found out it's because it was access to capital. So the one point of leverage that we had is the type of relationships that I formed with the factories where I didn't necessarily have access to capital, but I spent a lot of time nurturing those relationships. So they allowed me to have unique terms to be able to pay these things back. Of course, it was still stressful, but I found it quite, I don't know if it's coincidental. I don't know if it's intentional that 14 of those companies struggled and 3 of those companies were able to reach the finish line where one of those companies had an investor,
Mhm.
and 2, by the grace of God, just made it across the finish line.
Talk to us about how you ended up landing more of these deals.
Before the pandemic, I was just screen printing stuff. I had made like a suit, a silhouette, and it was so expensive at the time. And I wasn't doing the numbers where I could even afford $1,000 development on like one garment. But during the pandemic, I made a quick move for a little while to Portugal, which was supposed to be a little while. And I moved there and I was just like, I'm the type of person who I want to have the relationships and I want to know the manufacturers myself.
Mhm.
So when I got there, every single order, it was 3 days before the pandemic, every single order I had was canceled.
Jeez.
And so, during the pandemic, I think it was a month or 2 in, factories that opened up in Portugal. And immediately I just started on sweatpants. And then after the sweatpants are done and shipped, they asked me for something else, took that order, shipped those. And so that allowed me to be able to create a whole new collection. Because right after the sweatpants, I met the supplier and then they said to me, hey, we want to help you develop anything. And I remember being like, anything? And they're like, anything. And I was like, word? And they're like, word. So I took everything, scrapped it, redesigned a whole new collection. And they didn't charge me for that collection. So let's go back to that story. The retailer then says to me, we need this. And I could make it all of a sudden. And so October comes around and there's a trade show. It's a digital trade show. I'd never done one of those. Did the digital trade show and I fell flat. January comes around. And at this point, like I've run out of cash.
Mhm.
And then after the first trade show, this gentleman, Brian Heck, shout out to Brian, he reaches out to me. He says, hey, we want to do another trade show. As irresponsible as this sounds, I even took the rent money, fam. I took all money, including rent money, and I did that trade show. I was like,
Shoot your shot. You had to risk it all.
I shoot. And then an open call for Bloomingdale's. And when an open call, CFDA brands are in there, New York Men's Day brands, those are all fun, huge fashion funds.
Mhm.
And it was just me. And a couple of days later, they let me know I got the deal. And the part that was crazy was before the trade show ends, Macy's reaches out of nowhere and they say, hey, we're very keen on working with you. And so in one trade show, I get Macy's, I get Bloomingdale's. And then JD Sports and Finish Line happened, I believe it was that around that same time. So yeah, that's how it happened.
How much do trade shows cost, and how does one find themselves in a space whereby they can be part of a trade show?
The first one I ever went to was 2017, and they told me the price was 6 G's. And I looked at the guy and I was like, my man,
$6,000?
$6,000. I looked at the dude and I was like, my man, my credit was relatively good. Tried to apply to every bank and they told me no. Tried to apply everywhere. They told me no. They told me your earnings weren't good. And the one place that took me in was called the Opportunity Fund.
Okay.
And the Opportunity Fund said we give loans to people who are underrepresented and so on. So the Opportunity Fund gave me 5 G's. But with the trade show, all the other costs, the tangential costs are also a thing. And when I tell you that the rest of it was like, it was just by grace that like I managed to stay there that entire time.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, even up until now, it's still not like easy. Yeah.
So, okay, so we've done the trade shows. Moving forward, how do we then get to the finish lines?
You have to have relationships with your suppliers that are so good that when a finish line comes up to you and and you're like, oh, my prices are a bit higher, and they're like, no, we'll need you to land those prices a little bit lower. And
Mhm.
then you got to go to your supplier and you got to be like, dog, we got to kind of rework this a little bit so we can hit those price points.
Mhm.
But because your supplier knows your end goal is to deliver quality, your supplier then still delivers quality, but we're still able to do some design and technical things that make the break even point more achievable.
Let's dive straight into the products. I know you got a couple of things lined up for Rad Black Kids.
This season, I'm super excited. We drop our first military boot. We drop our first Chelsea boot,
Mhm.
and those are all handmade here in Portugal. They're fantastic.
Mhm.
On top of that, too, we have eyewear coming out, and it's handmade eyewear, completely handmade.
Throughout this whole time, you talk about relationships. There are a lot of emerging, starting off young Black designers who really would love to meet up with people like you and figure out how best they can collaborate. Is that something that Rad Black Kids is open to? And if so, how do they catch you?
For sure, we're open to it, and also mentorship is something that I think is really, really big. And just writing me directly on the Rad Black Kids on Instagram.